Hi, everybody. Welcome to Vision 360, where we look at cybersecurity from every angle, starting with the foundation, extending through corporate governance and beyond. I am your host, Matthew Webster, and I focus on solving cybersecurity governance by helping organizations align security with business strategy. That means emphasizing governance, resilience, communication, emotional intelligence, and practical risk management. My approach is shaped by decades of experience in the field, including several chief information security officer roles. I've worked with leadership teams through training, workshop, assessments, and direct advisory support, always with the goal of making cybersecurity a strategic asset and not a technical afterthought. Today, I'm honored to have Peter Gregory joining us. Peter has written more than 50 different cybersecurity, privacy, and engineering books over his career. Obviously, he has decades of experience and has held many CISO positions. That said, there's no way I could do justice to Peter's background and encompass all of his experience. So Peter, could you please provide a better introduction for everyone than I could possibly provide?
Sure, Matt, and thank you. It's an honor to be here. My career, and it's very start, and this will be a short answer. My career started in IT and IT engineering, and I've done software and network and security engineering, and pivoted into cybersecurity in the year 2000. And I'd been in a number of different GRC roles and leadership roles from then till now. And the writing of books was just one of those opportunities that came about in the late 90s. So I've been a GRC leader and a virtual CISO for a number of different public companies over periods of many years, and that's what I bring to our discussion today.
Fantastic. And that kind of takes us where we're going to be going. So thank you very much. So because of your wonderful and diverse background in cybersecurity, I thought it'd be interesting today to explore the beginning phases of GRC. And for those who may not understand what GRC is, it stands for governance, risk, and compliance. And those are very packed words to go into. But like many subjects in cybersecurity, it is easier said than done. And there's a lot of things you should be thinking about when you're starting that GRC journey within your organization. When it comes to more mature programs with more bells and whistles, beginning the GRC journey is critical. And it'd be the subject of what we're discussing today. So we've covered a little bit of the context here, but let's start with some of the basics. How do you look at GRC beyond the simplistic definition of GRC, and what should it be in theory?
Great question, Matt. And generally, as you stated, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. And that really comprises three different but related functions there. Governance really is just management's ability to have visibility and control over a set of business processes. And in this case, it's generally cybersecurity and privacy. And then risk is the need for having a life cycle risk management process in which risks are identified, recorded, analyzed, and decisions made about those risks and what an organization should do about them. And then compliance, which is often the impetus that gets the rest of this started, has to do with an organization's need to understand what it is required to do, whether it's by regulations or various standards imposed on them through contracts and so forth. And compliance often drives the execution of the other two. In that an organization that has to comply with some law or standard has to then figure out a way of organizing itself so that it can intentionally work towards complying with whatever those things are.
So you look at risk then as a function of compliance.
Well, compliance sometimes drives the beginning of a risk program. Generally speaking, most organizations are not going to fire up a GRC program when there is literally no regulation or other legal obligation for them to execute on privacy and security. Generally, organizations do it because some outside force forces them into it. Now, better organizations with better and higher maturity at the onset will develop a GRC program even before some regulation makes them do it. But all that said, there aren't many industry sectors where organizations have no requirement at all to do proper security and privacy.
Sure. And to me, risk management is very interesting. And when you look at it, there's the basic likelihood and impact. And I think most cybersecurity professionals are pretty experienced with that. But there's also these other concepts that are out there. You take something like risk tolerance or risk appetite. How do you see those fitting into the greater picture of governance within cybersecurity?
Well, when executed properly, risk tolerance and appetite are the guardrails that protect the organization from unwise decisions in risk management by somehow quantifying or qualifying what are the biggest types of risks that we might be willing to accept, and then how can we figure out what would be the biggest aggregation of risk as an organization that we would want to take on. And risk capacity is kind of what that last thing is. In my many years of consulting, as well as just employment in security leadership in a number of different organizations, I have found that very few organizations even attempt to define qualitatively or quantitatively risk appetite and risk tolerance in cybersecurity. Now, some organizations in regulated sectors, such as financial services, they're required to do it for the financial side of the house. And the better of those organizations can apply those principles into cyber risk as well. But in my experience, few companies do this. And so as a result, each risk management decision ends up being kind of a seat of the pants affair where executives or at whatever level of decision making is going on, they'll decide to, accept or not accept a risk based on how they feel more than on what does our guidance say.
Sure. And so then you're starting to jump into the next question, which is fantastic. But how do you look at the senior management versus the board of directors role in risk management processes? And also, do you find them setting the tolerance or appetite or risk thresholds when you're creating that risk program? Just to kind of provide some background for some people.
Well, great question. And again, in my experience of having been inside dozens of organizations, both public and private companies in almost every industry sector, um, there's a range at which higher levels of management are programmatically involved in cybersecurity. In the best of them, there is visibility at the highest levels of the organization, along with periodic board reporting. In other words, that some some information about cyber risk will be a part of the quarterly board deck, even if it's just one slide that's a dashboard of like, okay, here's where we are now, and we're better or worse than we were in the last quarter, um, and perhaps a mention of any significant incidents or other development. Uh, but a lot of organizations aren't there, and so ultimately, what happens is, as security leaders, we need to engage as high as we can, and that of course means that we have to have some powers of persuasion. Got to really be on your toes to have make the best use of the little bits of airtime we get with those senior executives to try and kind of wedge ourselves into their reality so that we can make them aware of risk and in turn also get resources from them.
Sure, that's absolutely true. And that's where, there's always some value having strong compliance standards because making that conversation, once you've determined the compliance needs to be met, is much easier. It's going above and beyond compliance is sometimes where those challenges. Have you found that generally true as well, or have you seen a lot of exceptions?
No, that's generally true. Organizations, again, they build all of these functions, the risk management and governance, only when some outside force makes them do it. And so, the big milestone is achieving the acceptable level of compliance with whatever it is we're required to do as an organization, and going beyond that is where the magic can really happen. It's not easy doing that. It represents a pivot that Better security leaders, I think, would sow those seeds early to say, this thing that we have to comply with, whether it's PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA or something else, we should consider this not we should not consider this as everything we should be doing as an organization. And of course, there's that worn out phrase, compliance does not equal security. But it's hard to play that tune and get any reasonable attention and action and changes of heart from senior executives. Uh, Generally, something has to happen before they will agree to uh, extend security beyond what they are contractually or regulation driven to do.
Sure. And that kind of takes us to the next idea, because you talked about leaders, the best ones, starting to sow those seeds. And I think that does play into when you're trying to build a real GRC program where you might need to take a little more time to develop that GRC program. What was the groundwork and what made that groundwork so necessary for you to build a strong GRC program?
So my earliest iteration of this with any meeting was with the company Western Wireless, which was a rural wireless telecommunications provider. It was since then acquired by Altel, which itself was acquired by Verizon. So as a corporate entity, Western Wireless is long gone. Um, I was hired there to begin building out the GRC part of its cybersecurity, and the impetus was driven by two things. Number one, Sarbanes-Oxley, which was brand new, and PCI, which was also brand new. And in both cases, those were, uh, regulations. I mean, to nitpick, PCI isn't a regulation, but it acts like one and is as effective as actual laws because of how PCI fits into the overall, visa ecosystem, right? Um, at any rate, these were two things that the organization was required to comply with, and so they poured resources into it, which included hiring me and then a couple of other people and then a couple of contractors, and we went about self-assessing our PCI compliance and beginning to launch projects to get ourselves into compliance. And this was, groundbreaking work. There was no encryption. There was not much in place, which was, typical kind of circa 2000 information systems and IT departments, right? And the maturity was fairly low, and so we had a long row to hoe there. Sarbanes-Oxley was a little more intense as we were a public company, and there was just absolutely no choice in the matter. The consequences of failing to uh, build out our controls framework and our self-assessment framework would have been pretty crushing. Uh, but we got it done. We got the controls built, and one by one we changed hearts and minds. The IT department was kicking and screaming, and they wanted nothing to do with this. But where we really got the fruit out of this was that prior to all of this effort, the IT department had kind of a hero culture. They had like the hero of the week or the hero of the month, um, because they didn't have things like change management and configuration management or incident management. I mean, not formal in any way. And after we got some of these processes in place, uh, the IT department was remarking, "Hey, we're not having as many outages anymore. Things are going pretty good." Um, but sometimes we thought that they were saying that without consciously realizing what made that change. Uh, but that's okay. We didn't have to wave our arms and say, "Well, the credit all goes to us." We were just happy that it got done. Um, and so that's one of my best tale of starting GRC from nothing in a public company. I mean, there was a
Sure.
lot to learn and a lot to do there. Um,
Sure. No, I mean, that's a fantastic example that you're bringing to the frontier. And I think one of the interesting things too, it seems to be very compliance focused and compliance driven, exactly like what you talked about. But also used a key technique focusing on the champions and building those champions and getting them on board and then working from there. What were some of the techniques you used to get some of the other people on board and get senior management on board with it as well? And they knew they had to, but still you're going to get some people who are going to drag their feet from a management perspective due to cost or other considerations. How do you change some of those hearts and minds?
Well, each one is really different, and what's really vital here is being a good listener, because and often cybersecurity people we tend to be good talkers a lot, but we really need to be a good listener as well. And this comes from our um, implicit need to really have a deep understanding of how the business works and where their pain points are. And so changing hearts and minds is really it really happens one at a time. Each person is different, and so there isn't just one formula or magic phrase one can use to, instantly convert someone from thinking cybersecurity is bad to thinking it's essential. Uh, we really have to kind of walk in their shoes and experience their pain and have empathy for that, so that we can then slowly show them that there is, a better way of doing things. It's easier sometimes, it's harder sometimes, and at times it can be rather challenging to help bridge the intellectual gap between what a particular manager or leader might be responsible for in a company and how their mission relates to what we have to be doing as an organization, whether it's, policies, controls, etc.
Well, I think you
It's
also
one
hinted.
relationship at a time.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you kind of hinted at one of the things that you could do. You could take, hey, we've got a lot of outages here. We could reduce that by introducing a framework like ITIL, a change management framework, to make sure that the changes are made more smoothly, that you have a process in place. Hey, those servers are getting old. Let's replace them every 4 years or 3 years, depending on the organization. Talk to me about some of those other things that you did to start changing the hearts and minds, and what happened. Did it start to snowball after a period of time and more people jumped on board? Did you start top down, middle up? What
Well,
was, or was it all the above?
we all of the above, Matt, and again, it really depends on kind of the quality and depth of every relationship. Because, in an IT organization of say 30 or 50 people, or, at whatever size it is, or even in a very large organization, you're going to have kind of a handful of individual relationships, and you sort of have to curate each one of them and bring each of those people along. And they're going to be in different stages of their journey. They're going to have different background and experience themselves. Uh, they will have experienced good cybersecurity and bad cybersecurity in their past, and maybe even in their present, right? So bringing each one of them along is really essential. I often liken the role of a CISO to an orchestra conductor. We're not making any of the noise. We're not building things in the organization. All we're doing is waving a little stick, right? And everyone else is playing instruments, hopefully, on key and on time and in tune. But it's really not as easy as all that, because every musician is at their own, they're in their own journey of learning and doing, and some of them are over their heads, and others are bored, and others are thinking of leaving their jobs, and others just don't care that much. So it really requires one-on-one relationships here. And one of them in particular that comes to mind at Western Wireless is that we had to enact a cybersecurity policy, and the organization didn't have one, and we had to have one. Sarbanes-Oxley required it, and PCI required it, and yet the GC, the General Counsel, he didn't want to do it. I drafted it, and he's like, "No, dude, don't you understand? No, I don't want a policy." And he explained why, and his explanation was very compelling. He said, "If our policy is all, oh, what's the word? I can't think of it. Starts with an A. Aspirational. If an organization with a policy that is largely aspirational is not in a good position, because if they were ever in legal proceedings, then it would make the company look worse if they had a policy they weren't following than if they didn't have a policy. But I said, well, Jeff, it's too bad. We have to do it because we're going to be in trouble if we don't. And so finally, he just, maybe I wore him down. I'm not sure, but he did agree to negotiate that, and we got a policy done in a few hours of just going through line by line in this policy, to where it was something I could live with and something he could live with. It wasn't ideal, but you have to just start, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're really sitting down and working together, because that can be a challenge too, because it helps to get their buy-in, even if it's reluctant in the example you provided. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, and ultimately, I mean, you really have to just get the best that you can get from each person you work with. And ultimately, the CISO job is one of, we have to be a good negotiator. We have to be able to influence and compel and negotiate. We don't always, and sometimes we never get everything we want. We have to really have, the emotional maturity to decide, okay, how much is enough for now? Even if it's not ideal, and even if it doesn't check all the compliance boxes, never mind the risk boxes that are, beyond
Right.
compliance.
And that's always an interesting challenge too, because I've noticed there are many different levels of auditors. You've got some, they'll let anything pass. Then there are others who are like, nope, I need every single thing. And that's got to be a little bit of a dance on your side too. Did you get, like, say before PCI or some of these others, did you get a pre-audit done to figure out what the auditors would accept ahead of time? Or what were some of the individual approaches that you took in that particular case?
I've seen every use case and beyond. I've seen pre-audits, and yeah, every auditor is different. I mean, they are on their own journey, and they have their own level of expertise. And one of the things I saw in the value of the CISA certification that I earned like more than 20 years ago was, even though I never aspired to be an IT auditor, I saw that it was important to understand their techniques, because I was working at that time in an organization that was becoming subject to more and more external auditors. And I thought, if I want to have any shot at succeeding in these audits, I need to understand how they do what they do and why. And I think a lot of the people that get the CISA are in the same camp. They never want to be an auditor, but CISA is equally valuable for an auditee as it is an auditor. Let's see, where was I going on that? Oh gosh. Yes. One example of an audit. I when I worked at Concur Technologies, I started there in, I think, 2005. And Sarbanes-Oxley was still fairly new. And when the timing of my starting at the company is they were in the middle of their Sarbanes-Oxley audit. So at that point, the controls were set in stone, and I was, hopping on this hay wagon kind of, halfway through the ride. So I was just observing and listening. And one control that a field auditor failed for us was a control that was worded something like this. It said that, all uh, all Windows X points endpoints are protected with Norton antivirus, right? I mean, the control literally said words something like that. Well, we had some different brand. We had McAfee or ESET or something else. And the auditor said, well, I got to fail this control because you don't have Norton antivirus. And I went, really? You're gonna do that? And she leans forward and she said, Peter, it's a badly written control, but I have to do it because my management, they're really strict on this stuff. And I went, okay, fair, we'll take it. I mean, this is an easy one to accept, we'll fix it, but yeah, you're right. It is a badly worded control. It was written before I got here, and I recognize that kind of a problem, and that won't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that in SAS 70. There's before, like some of those where
Yeah.
you were testing against your own controls. But the only time I've seen that is from a government perspective where they required a certain firewall at this level, a different type of firewall at this level, and they were very specific. But only in strange cases like that have I seen those, but those are exceptions.
And generally, better written controls aren't going to get that specific because controls should be
Yes.
durable and they should be more like principles instead of instructions. But different companies,
Yeah,
take different approaches to that.
absolutely. That's one of the things too, because you've got to, marry what's going on in reality versus somewhere else. So in the policies and procedures. But one of the
Yeah.
things that you've been going through, it seems like from an outsider's perspective, they would look at what you're saying and say, wow, it looks like there's a million little details to pay attention to, which, yes, there are a million details whenever you're covering any type of compliance framework, because
Right.
you've got to get everybody to buy into it. How do you validate it? Are you checking it on a regular basis, or do you just let it go and check it just before an audit? But if you're trying to figure out, what are some of the key milestones that you would consider, or the dependencies when you're looking at that, building that GRC program beyond just, hey, let's get these onesies and twosies out of the way in terms of the controls? How do you approach that? And what are the key things from, in your view, related to GRC?
Well, there's a lot of different pieces to that, Matt, but I think what is really important to me and has worked for me in the past is slowly building up that culture of responsible cybersecurity. And one place where I've had success there is in the whole concept of control ownership. When there are controls that an organization has to perform because of, either some compliance or something else, then the concept of assigning a control to an owner and then helping them understand what does that mean? You're responsible for the control being operated properly day in and day out, and also through self-reporting if there are any problems with that control. And helping individual control owners understand those concepts and they're being willing to step up and actually take that responsibility is really great. There are going to be some people though who don't willingly take the responsibility, but ultimately there's not really a choice, right? I mean, if an organization has to do something, they have to do something, and it's generally going to be pretty clear, what bubble in the org chart is the one that makes the most sense to be, responsible for that. I mean, it's got to be, close enough to the action, but also in a a management or supervisory type position to have authority to ensure that the control is carried out the way that it is supposed to be.
Sure. So there's a lot of work in terms of just getting people on board. That can take hours and hours and hours when you're dealing with a complex system like PCI, for example. So
Right.
like
Well, hours and hours over an elapsed time of months, quarters, and even
years
years.
in some cases.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, the culture of cybersecurity is not something that can turn on a dime. If it's there, great. If it's not there, it's literally gonna be years
yeah,
to do it. It could be because it's really about getting people to think differently about
sure,
the information technology that enables their business to operate and exist and make money and
sure.
to compensate all the employees and the shareholders and so forth. But it in an organization that lacks that kind of awareness, again, it's almost like a one person at a time, helping them understand. Security awareness training helps a little bit. Other kinds of briefings help a little bit.
Yeah.
It it can be a long slog. I started doing this in the early and mid 2000s, so 20 years ago. Things are a little bit different today because cybersecurity is now a part of almost every organization's culture. Doesn't mean they like it, but they know about it. They know it's a
Sure.
thing, and still, different companies have kind of a different levels of embracing that and understanding that it is critical and why it's critical.
Yeah. And so one of the interesting concepts that goes along with this and there are different definitions for this. I'm going to be very transparent. I'm aware of that. Is assurance. Like I'm big on assurance. Trust, but verify. And I know you've heard that phrase many times
Oh, yeah.
before. All of us in cybersecurity have. So when you're talking about trust but verify, when you're starting to build a program, let's say if you need a configuration management, like I know, for example, the modern PCI requires CIS baselines added in there. And so
Right.
if they're requiring that, you should go validate that. You get an additional system to take a look at that. Because one of the issues that I've seen over and over again, especially in government and pretty much everywhere, is there is configuration drift. Things change over a period of time, and not always does it change according to change management practices.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they did, and it's kind of a bonus, but we all know that people like it's an emergency, some system went down, they're getting screamed at by an executive, and they need to get the system up and running. They'll bypass some of the requirements or not remember them on the fly, and things are going to go. So, how have you played in that whole concept of assurance to that GRC program? Sometimes I know that's owned by internal audit because they'll play that interlocutor between the business and cybersecurity, but other times that's owned by by the cybersecurity teams. Especially, we didn't have the three lines model back 20 years ago, so it's a whole different ball game today for some organizations than others. Some haven't even aren't even aware of the three lines model. But how have you worked with assurance in the past?
Well, again, it depends on the culture of the organization and where's their head at right now. Uh, and for some of them, you can say the word and use the word and so forth. But many times, however, is you have to work on building assurance without ever saying that that's what you're doing. Um, it it that might sound sneaky, but it doesn't intend to be. It's a little bit like, like our own efforts as security leaders in driving upward the culture of cybersecurity. I mean, we do it quietly sometimes, loudly sometimes, with individual people and leaders at times. Whenever we have an opportunity to say a few remarks. So, kind of all along the way, we're working on assurance without ever really saying that we are. Uh, it depends on the organization's maturity. I mean, the three lines is a really great tool for organizations that are far enough down the road to understand the concept and understand how it works and why it's important. But ultimately, in terms of changing culture, what I've found over many years is that organizations have a finite capacity for change in any given period of time, like in a year. And maturity is one way that we measure that. And so, an organization that might have maturity level 1 or 2 that you want to get up into like the threes, 3.5s, you can't do that in a year. There's too many changes that have to be done in too many places, and there isn't enough of us to influence all of those changes to occur. Uh, so it's again, there's that finite capacity for cultural change, meaning how we think about our company, but also culture is how we get things done. Are we formal in our processes, or are we ad hoc? Are we a bunch of cowboys, or are we a bunch of lunatics in the asylum, or prisoners in the lockup, or are we more responsible, intentional, mature, and programmatic approach to how we want to get things done? And some of those maturity milestones are hard to overcome, like having formal procedures and processes that are written down. Some organizations are there, and organizations that are that far and are measuring things, that's pretty good. And it's easier to bring them along because they're already in the life cycle of governance and controls and measurement and continuous improvement. But organizations that aren't there yet, I mean, that is a big, big first step to writing things down. And sometimes it's not done because the people are too busy. Sometimes it's not done because people think, okay, if I write this down, then my job isn't secure, and can someone else can do my job if I write it down, because all they have to do is rip that document out from my hands and I go, oh, I know how to do this. Okay, we're going to fire you, and now I'm going to do it. So there's a lot of fear that you have to overcome in terms of getting the maturity of our organization up to that basic level of kind of the two and a half, three, where it's easier to make a difference in cybersecurity and privacy.
To me, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of trust that has to go into that because that's something that needs to be established at the manager level on the IT side of the house. It needs to be established on the cybersecurity side of the house. So that's probably a part of the big challenge that you are working to overcome because that's where fear comes from. It's lack of trust and fear that, like you were talking about, people worried about their job, losing their jobs. There are certain people who are just wired that way. You never tell anybody anything. And that ends up being a challenge within organizations too. Talk to me about how you've dealt with some of those types of challenges.
Those that can be hard, and I've seen even in some companies that I won't mention, should not mention, where the relationship between IT and the rest of the business is adversarial, where even IT leadership is, they are swords drawn and ready for battle every day because they feel like they are defending themselves and their methods and their jobs, and they don't want to listen to any outsiders, even business leaders. So it all depends on the culture of an IT department and whether they are willing to negotiate for a better position that helps protect the business. And even in good relationships, it's still hard to work with IT because IT's mission and our mission are different, and they are kind of conflicting with one another. IT, at a high level, IT's mission is value creation. Our mission is value protection. I liken it to the era of the 70s and 80s when we saw a lot of safety mechanisms that were mandated to be included in automobiles. Airbags, side crash beams, rollover protection, emission controls, and so forth. Engineering in those organizations didn't like it because it made the car heavier, more complex, more expensive, and they didn't like it. But ultimately they had to comply, and so that's the nature of it. Sometimes is that in our mission as value protection, there's a little bit of a tax on value creation. There is sort of like there's in a conceptual way, there's kind of like a tax rate. It might be 2% or 5%. It does introduce a little bit of drag on the IT department's ability to create value. It's like the weight of the seatbelts and the airbags, but overall it protects the entire business, including the IT department, by helping reduce the risk of things going wrong.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I've encountered that myself. I think anybody who's been in cybersecurity leadership at all has seen some elements of that too. So, yeah, no, that's extraordinarily helpful. Is there like a case that you've had where you were magically able to just turn around that IT department as a result of, say, the audit or background or situation?
Hmm.
Even if it's just one department.
Yeah, there was let's see, and I can talk about this. This is public information. Um, I worked in a company that had a physical break-in, and the break-in occurred at the company's headquarters where the corporate raised floor was located. So email servers, file servers, the accounting system, and so forth. Almost all of the line of business applications were on-prem and operated in that space. The customer data center was miles away and segregated from that. At any rate, the organization had a physical break-in. The burglars, their technique was rather novel. They had a big sledgehammer in their vehicle, and they knocked the Knox box off the wall. The Knox box is the little fire department box that you see in front of every business in North America and elsewhere. They knocked that box off and they took it home and used something to open it, and then they came back and they just helped themselves into the building, and they had the card keys and some metal keys, and they had the run of the place over Thanksgiving weekend, and they stole a bunch of stuff, including the email servers. They took the email servers, they just took them out of the rack and took them home, and a bunch of other stuff. They went into the IT department and they stole like boxes of hard drives, that were used hard drives. And so the result of that break-in, it was exceedingly painful, for the company, because there were just ramifications. I mean, it was a very, very bad optic. So the senior management, they got it. They understood now what it was like to
Sure.
have a cyber incident, and just from, they understood it overnight.
Yeah.
And
What I like
uh,
about that too, that seems to be it's physical security, but it obviously bleeds over into cyber at the same time. And it
right.
paints a picture. Because one of the things that I find about cybersecurity, and this is probably one of the challenges you've dealt with, cybersecurity is a little bit abstract. So it's
It-
hard for people to
yep.
understand vulnerabilities sometimes. I've worked with executives who just don't get it. Like, okay, well, it's kind of like we've got a piece of bread here, we're pouring water through it. We need to make sure we've got a better bread. So we have to harden the system. Um,
Yes.
that's a good example that you're talking about right there. So,
So a year after that, so our budget went up like threefold. We got the budget we needed, and our security team went from like 6 to 15 people in a year and a half. We started an actual security operations group, which we didn't really have before. And we started making tremendous progress. And where I really saw this happen was, I had done assessments of our company's various operations centers around the world. I went and I did physical security assessments of all these locations, and came back, and I had a set of recommendations. And one of them had to do with physical perimeter security at a business office in Europe that was a development center. And we were a tenant in this space, and it was in a large metropolitan area in one of the capitals of Europe. And in our quarterly governance meeting, in which the president of the company attended, I and the way we did risk treatment was for these biggest risks, we'd flesh it all out in advance, and we would come up with the risks and describe it, and a little bit of background on it, and then we'd have a recommendation, and then we would ask for ratification of the recommendation. And in this case, it had to do with visitors. Once they'd been in the lobby of the company, they had free reign of the whole place. There were no security zones within the tenant space where our developers and operations people were. And because of the complications of the layout of this building, we showed that this was a risk. And then our recommendation was, we recommend that we just accept this risk because of the complication of remediating it. And the president looked up and he said, no, we're going to fix this. We believe in the safety of our employees and of our intellectual property, and we are going to build that barrier so that people have to be buzzed through the reception area to get to where all of our employees work. And it's silently, I'm just going,
yes.
yes, yes, they are paying attention, and countermanded a recommendation. And some people might think, well, that was terrible that they overrode you. And it's like, no, it was amazing, because they got it and they decided, as a leader of the business, no, that's not what we want. We want to do it this way. So
Sure.
getting that executive management engagement in these kinds of conversations that was
Sure.
pure gold for me.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit because that's a fantastic example. But then, like when you're talking about to some of the stuff, so let's take level three, which from for the cybersecurity people, you're going to think about that from a CMMI perspective, the policies and procedures that you've spoken about.
Right.
Sometimes that language is going to be very off-putting to board of directors because most board of directors do not have anybody with cybersecurity expertise. Many of them don't even have IT expertise on them. They'll get somebody who has the token security person and they've got no experience.
Right.
That's going to be a bit of a challenge there when you're sitting down and working with that. How have you, when you're bringing in some of these GRC processes, when you're talking about some of these wins as a CISO or other roles you may have had, how do you sit down and communicate with them in a way to really show the value of the GRC program and not just a compliance standpoint, but talking about it from a whole governance and a process perspective? So I'm going to elevate that question a little bit. So I'd
Right,
love to hear
right.
your
Well,
viewpoint.
yeah, building a board deck, for instance, um, means that you have to understand board members' point of view. Who are they and what are they thinking about? And uh, until you see it done or see some good examples, it can be challenging for a practitioner to understand how to translate all these nuts and bolts into a simple picture. Um, and there isn't just a recipe for doing this that will work everywhere because every board is different and every company is different. And you've got variations in the company size, industry sector, and the individual conditions of, how well is the company performing right now? Is it like just trying to survive another quarter, or are they making money hand over fist? And I mean, there are just so many variables that are unique to every business. What is really necessary here is to be able to be what I call bilingual, be able to have meaningful conversations with practitioners in IT and other parts of the business, HR, marketing, legal, product development, and operations. But then to be able to pivot and have a conversation with a board. There is good material out there that can be kind of reference and learning material for CISOs and cybersecurity leaders who don't have board reporting experience and need to get it. One of them, one of the first publications I saw that was really valuable was a publication by the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, and something like 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, they had this publication that was a little booklet about 25 pages called Cyber Risk Oversight. And this is material for board members that explains to them what is cyber risk and why is it important. And for any cybersecurity leader or someone who aspires to be a leader, I consider this required reading because it gives you the world through the lens of a board member. And one of the best parts of one of the early editions of that publication was a single page that was questions that a board member should ask a cybersecurity leader. And that content is pure gold because for the leader, it helps us understand what is important to the board or what things should be important to the board. And that can help formulate a kind of a message that you can then deliver to a board at their level in their language to help them understand what is the state of cyber risk in this company.
Sure. I think that's extraordinarily helpful. And what I've found is a lot of different boards, they'll sometimes create their own, like you may present KPIs, but sometimes if they're not happy with it or it's too confusing, they're going to create a different KPI for you. They may not use, like I know a lot of cyber people will use like the term hygiene, and that can mean so many different things. And I've seen that same term thrown around in a lot of different contexts, but they could create their own version of that based on some of the stuff you're saying, because what you're saying could be too confusing. Have you found that? And what's the best way you've navigated those types of conversations?
I've seen that, and in one of my virtual CISO engagements, which was about 2.5 years in length with a public company, um, I and in that vCISO role, I worked directly to the board of directors, and then the secretary, who was the general counsel of the company. I mean, he was kind of my boss because he was there every day, and the board members weren't because they were all over North America, and they would fly in every quarter for board meeting week, right? So, in part, I worked with the general counsel who was the board secretary, and so he showed me prior board decks, and over a couple of months, I began to get a really good idea of the state of cybersecurity in this company and what they needed to do. Um, I then developed relationships with two of the board members who became my champions, and both of those people are kind of professional board members. They're on one or two dozen different boards around the
Sure.
world, and they became my champions, and they were the people who early on would give me feedback on my and my board presentations. And generally, every quarter, I had 15 minutes of airtime, which is a
Normal.
lot for a cyber leader.
Yeah.
And in the first one, in the first time I appeared before the board, I had my board deck, which was like two slides, and my time slice was 15 minutes, and we went 45 minutes because they kept asking questions, and
Oh, perfect.
really good questions. And the board secretary finally says, "We need to end this now because at this point we're going to be like going to like 7 p.m. or something." And it's like, fine. But that was really tremendous. But having one or more champions is really great on a board. But at the very least, if you can have a relationship with someone on the board who you can talk with, and where you can begin to understand more about the things that are of interest to the board and ways of producing messaging that can be effective, that the board can understand, is really valuable. I mean,
Sure.
boards are in many cases, a board is not going to just reach out to the cyber leader to say, "Hey, would you come and come to our party every quarter?" I mean, it's
Yeah, it's yeah,
that's hard to do. I mean, someone has to bring you in.
sure.
Um,
And so there's an interesting gap too as we start to get into boards, because it's one of the things I think more and more board members are starting to ask about is, and I'm sure you're gonna be shocked by this, artificial intelligence, AI. But one of the things that a lot of board members do is they tend to rely on compliance. When you look at it, that is their proxy for security. So when you're looking at things from a risk standpoint, sometimes that doesn't play in, but they're starting to ask more and more questions around that. So for this is not true across the board for many organizations, trying to define that AI governance process is going to be extraordinarily critical. And so how have you started to navigate those types of conversations and broken away from traditional compliance to talk about AI and the risks that are not necessarily associated from a compliance standpoint?
Great question, Matt. And AI is such a marvelous opportunity for organizations, but it's kind of a forked opportunity because it can be an opportunity for greatness and continued and expanded success, but it can also be an opportunity for failing even more quickly. Of course, some business leader, they say fail fast so that you can at least, start over and
Sure.
get to success. Um, AI, I highly recommend in that organizations establish an appropriate level of AI governance, because AI introduces a couple of new business problems into an organization that never existed before, that are related to the use of information as well as the potential outcomes of the use of an AI system. So the two main areas are privacy, in that AI systems have different ways of consuming information, including PII, if an organization chooses to train an AI system with PII. There are some things that are essential in privacy that AI systems don't necessarily do very well, such as comply with the right to be forgotten. I mean, you can't go and just untrain an AI system by pulling one record out. You almost have to like start over and retrain it, but you can't retrain it every time someone says, I want you to forget about me. So there's a big fat hairy problem there that it can be overcome. And I think that ultimately there'll be some innovation in LLMs that might make this not such a big problem. The other is in decision making that AI systems do. And AI again can be a really great force multiplier, and drive consistency into things like processing and approving loan applications and setting terms like interest rates in loan applications. Also, housing assistance and employment and medical diagnosis. There are a lot of areas where organizations see the value in giving AI a data set, and then you tell it, tell me what this thing means. And for instance, taking an MRI and having the AI tell you, does this patient have some kind of a condition here that maybe our radiologists may or may not recognize. So AI governance is needed so that organizations can implement AI with the proper safeguards so that they go in safely, responsibly, ethically, and don't end up, in big trouble on the other side if they don't take these considerations into account.
I recognize what you're saying from a business standpoint, but then trying to take that up to the next level to communicate that to the board. How would you work with AI in that particular case?
Well, I think what you're asking, Matt, is how do we communicate the opportunities and the guardrails
Risks.
of AI?
Yeah,
Because yeah, board members everywhere should be saying, okay, AI looks like a pretty big thing that can really help us out, and and I think in some cases boards might assign to CEO and other senior executives like go identify some AI opportunities and then report what those opportunities are at our next board meeting or in any interim meetings, because a board's interest is in the prosperity of the organization, right? And AI is a really compelling force multiplier to extend that, but not only extend it, but it's quickly becoming just a competitive differentiator. It's not so much that having AI makes you better, but having AI means you're keeping up with everyone else who is already further down that road. So I think that when board members ask the senior leadership team to identify and begin drawing up plans for exploiting the AI opportunity, they should do so. But governance can bring some sanity and some reasonableness into that. And honestly, AI governance really is no different than, say, cybersecurity governance or IT governance or governance in other areas. It's just a way for management to set some of the ground rules and have visibility and control over what the business is doing, as opposed to just handing them wads of money and it's like, go have fun.
sure.
So it's really a safeguard for the business, to ensure that the opportunities that it identifies are good opportunities and that the outcomes are likely to be good, provided that they take different approaches and do this right.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. So we're getting close to the end of it here. So if you had to distill GRC and the groundwork into just a few lasting principles, what would they be and why?
Well, in terms of really high level principles, I would say that the overall picture of GRC is that cybersecurity departments and the departments they influence, like IT and HR, we need to be intentional and consistent on what we do. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Sure. Well, thank
You
you so
just
much. I feel like you
Mhm.
just brought a tremendous amount of wealth of knowledge, and I think everybody's going to enjoy this podcast. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been very helpful, very enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for having me on today.
Absolutely.